Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, crisp and official amidst the usual pile of bills and junk mail. Arthur Penhaligon, a man whose life had hitherto been a study in unremarkable routine, slit it open with a dull butter knife. His curiosity piqued more by the unfamiliar crest on the envelope than any expectation of significant news. He was a librarian in a sleepy suburban town, his days measured in the rustle of turning pages and the quiet hum of the Dewey Decimal System. Adventure, let alone mystery, was something he catalogued, not experienced. The solicitor's jargon was dense, but the gist was clear. His great-aunt, Elara Penhaligon, a woman he barely remembered from a single childhood visit, a fleeting image of sharp eyes and a house that smelled of dried herbs and old secrets, had passed away. More astonishingly, she had named him the sole inheritor of her estate. Penhaligon Manor, situated in the remote, almost forgotten hamlet of Hollow Creek. Arthur had never heard of Hollow Creek. A quick search online yielded little more than its location. A speck on a map nestled deep within the sprawling, ancient Blackwood forest, miles from any significant township. There were no tourist photos, no local government websites, just a few cryptic mentions in obscure historical forums discussing local folklore and disappearances. His initial reaction was one of mild bewilderment. He had no desire to uproot his quiet life, nor did he have the funds or inclination to maintain a likely dilapidated manor. His plan was simple: visit the place, assess its value, and sell it as quickly as possible. A week later, after arranging a leave of absence from the library, Arthur found himself driving a rented, sputtering pickup truck down a progressively narrowing and poorly maintained road. The vibrant greens of the countryside had slowly given way to the deeper, more somber hues of Blackwood forest. Ancient trees, their branches gnarled and intertwined like arthritic fingers, pressed in on either side, casting the road in perpetual twilight. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling, like old blood or rusted iron. His GPS had given up miles ago, its cheerful voice replaced by an unnerving silence. He was relying on a faded, hand-drawn map included with the solicitor's letter, its lines thin and spidery. According to the map, Hollow Creek wasn't so much a village as a loose scattering of buildings around a central, unnamed creek. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of jostling over potholes and navigating around fallen branches, the trees thinned slightly and he saw it. A weathered wooden sign, barely legible, that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek, tread respectfully." The paint was peeling and one corner of the sign was splintered, as if something large had clawed at it. Beyond the sign, the hamlet unfolded. It was less a place and more a collection of shadows. A handful of houses, their wood darkened by age and weather, stood silent and watchful. Windows were like vacant eyes, many boarded up. Chimneys, cold and smokeless, pointed accusingly at the bruised, overcast sky. There was no sign of life, no people, no animals, not even the distant bark of a dog. The only sound was the sighing of the wind through the trees and the mournful gurgle of the creek that snaked its way through the center of the hamlet. Penhaligon Manor stood on a slight rise overlooking the rest of Hollow Creek, a brooding silhouette against the darkening sky. It was larger than he'd imagined, a rambling two-story structure of dark stone and timber with a steeply pitched roof and numerous gables. Ivy crawled up its walls like a grasping disease, and several windows were broken, dark maws gaping into the unseen interior. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Arthur parked the truck, the engine's dying cough an obscenely loud intrusion in the profound silence. He stepped out, a shiver tracing its way down his spine despite the mild temperature. The air here felt heavy, oppressive, as if laden with unspoken sorrows. The solicitor, a Mr. Blackwood, a name Arthur found unnervingly appropriate, was supposed to meet him here, but there was no sign of him or anyone else. He checked his phone, no signal. Of course. He approached the manor's massive oak front door, a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a coiled serpent, its only adornment. He hesitated, then lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed unnaturally loud, then died, swallowed by the silence. He waited. Nothing. He tried the handle. To his surprise, it turned with a rusty groan and the heavy door creaked inward, revealing a dark, cavernous hallway. The air that billowed out was cold and musty, carrying the scent of dust, decay, and something else. Something faintly sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit or funeral flowers. "Mr. Blackwood?" Arthur called out, his voice sounding small and reedy. Only the echo answered him. Stepping inside felt like stepping into another time, another world. Dust lay thick on everything, cobwebs draped like macabre decorations. Faded tapestries clung to the walls, their once vibrant colors muted to shades of gray and brown. Antique furniture, shrouded in white sheets, loomed like ghostly sentinels. He found a lantern and a box of matches on a nearby hall table, evidently left for him. With trembling hands, he lit the lantern, its flickering flame casting dancing, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of his vision. He had to find the solicitor, or at least some indication of where he might be. Or perhaps a reason to leave. The thought of spending a night in this place filled him with a primal dread he couldn't quite articulate. Chapter 2. The House of Whispers. Arthur spent the next hour exploring the ground floor of Penhaligon Manor, the lantern his only companion. Each room was a testament to faded grandeur and prolonged neglect. The drawing room, with its high ceilings and boarded-up windows, felt like a tomb. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed and silent, a thick layer of dust, its only shroud. In the dining room, a long mahogany table was set with tarnished silverware and cobweb-laden candelabras, as if expecting guests who had failed to arrive decades ago. The library was perhaps the most unsettling. Books, thousands of them, lined the shelves from floor to ceiling. But many had spilled onto the floor, their pages warped and mildewed. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper. He picked up one volume, its leather cover crumbling in his fingers. The title was illegible, the language within unfamiliar, filled with strange symbols and disturbing illustrations that seemed to squirm on the page. He dropped it as if it had burned him. Throughout his exploration, he was plagued by a persistent feeling of being watched. He would catch fleeting movements out of the corner of his eye, hear what sounded like soft footsteps in the room above, or a faint whisper that seemed to slither just beneath the threshold of his hearing. Each time he spun around, lantern held high, there was nothing. Just the dust, the silence, and the oppressive weight of the house's history. He found the kitchen at the back of the manor. It was a vast, stone-flagged room with a huge soot-blackened hearth. Pots and pans coated in rust and grime hung from hooks on the ceiling. On a rough wooden table, he found a plate with a desiccated piece of bread and a cup containing a dark, stagnant liquid, and beside it a note penned in an elegant, spidery script. "Arthur Penhaligon, welcome. Provisions are sparse. The well water is unpredictable. Mr. Blackwood was called away. He suggests you make yourself comfortable. He will return by morning. Keys to the cellar are on the mantel. Some things are best left undisturbed. E.P. Elara Penhaligon. His great-aunt, but she was dead. The note looked fresh, the ink barely dry. A cold dread seeped into Arthur's bones. Was this a joke? A very elaborate, very unsettling prank? He looked at the date on the solicitor's letter again. It was recent. Elara had indeed passed away. So who had written this note? The mention of the cellar keys drew his attention to the massive stone mantelpiece above the hearth. There, glinting in the lantern light, was a heavy iron ring holding a single ornate key. The cellar. Some things are best left undisturbed. The words echoed in his mind, a clear warning. He had no intention of going into any cellars. His priority was to find a defensible room, barricade the door, and wait for morning, or for Mr. Blackwood, whichever came first. Then he would get out of Hollow Creek and never look back. He chose a small study off the main hallway. It had a sturdy-looking door and a window that, while grimy, wasn't boarded up. He dragged a heavy armchair in front of the door, checked the window latch. It was rusted shut, which he counted as a small blessing, and settled down in another dusty armchair, the lantern on the floor beside him casting a small pool of light in the encroaching darkness. Sleep was out of the question. The house seemed to come alive as night deepened. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, though still unintelligible. He heard creaks and groans from the floors above, the sound of something heavy being dragged across a room, the faint, mournful notes of what might have been a harpsichord. impossibly distant yet chillingly clear. He tried to read one of his own paperbacks he'd brought, a mundane detective novel, but the words blurred before his eyes. His imagination, usually a placid creature, was now running rampant, populating the shadows with unseen horrors. He kept thinking of his great-aunt Ilara, the woman he barely knew. What kind of life had she lived here, in this isolated, decaying mausoleum? What secrets had these walls absorbed? Around what he guessed was midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath plumed in the air. The lantern flame flickered violently, then shrank, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to claw at the walls. A new sound joined the nightly chorus, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from within the walls themselves. Tap, 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 like fingernails on old wood. Arthur sat frozen, his heart hammering. The tapping moved, circling the room as if something was testing the boundaries of his small sanctuary. He clutched the heavy iron poker he'd taken from the fireplace, his knuckles white. Then a new whisper, clearer than the others, seemed to breathe directly into his ear, cold and sibilant. "We know you're here, Arthur." He leapt to his feet, swinging the poker wildly. "Who's there?" he cried. "Is this his voice cracking. "Show yourself." Only the echoing silence answered, and the relentless, mocking tap-tap-tapping from within the walls. Chapter 3. The village that sleeps. Dawn arrived not with a glorious sunrise, but with a grudging lightening of the oppressive grey sky. The sounds of the night faded with the darkness, leaving behind an exhausted, hollow silence. Arthur hadn't slept a wink. His eyes were gritty, his body ached, but he was alive. Mr. Blackwood had not appeared. The thought of spending another night in Penhaligon Manor was unbearable. He had to get out. But first, he needed answers, or at least to confirm he wasn't losing his mind. He decided to explore the hamlet of Hollow Creek itself. Perhaps there were other residents, people who could explain the strange occurrences or at least offer a working telephone. He left the manor, the heavy front door groaning shut behind him with a sound of grim finality. The hamlet in the daylight was no less unsettling than it had been by dusk. The houses remained shuttered and silent. No smoke rose from the chimneys. No children played in the overgrown yards. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath or had been caught in a state of perpetual unnatural sleep. The creek, the lifeblood of any normal village, gurgled sluggishly, its waters dark and opaque. Strange, pale weeds grew along its banks, their tendrils reaching out like grasping fingers. The air still held that faint, unsettling metallic tang. He approached the nearest house, a small, dilapidated cottage with a sagging porch. He knocked on the door. The sound was absorbed by the damp wood, leaving no echo. He knocked again, louder. Nothing. He tried the handle. Locked. He moved on to the next house, and the next, with the same result. Each door was locked, each window shuttered or dark. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. Or perhaps they were all inside, watching him, listening. The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through him. In the center of the hamlet, near a crumbling stone bridge that arched over the creek, stood what looked like it might have once been a general store or a post office. The sign above the door was too faded to read. The windows were grimy, but not boarded. He peered inside. The interior was dark, shelves mostly bare, a thick layer of dust coating everything. But he saw a telephone on a counter, an old rotary model. Hope flickered. The door was unlocked. He stepped inside, the tinkle of a small bell above the door startlingly loud in the silence. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten, like the smell in the manor. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone here?" A floorboard creaked in the back of the store. Arthur's heart leaped. "Hello? I just need to use the phone. My car, well, I need to contact a solicitor, Mr. Blackwood." Slow, shuffling footsteps approached. An old woman emerged from the shadows, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes pale and cloudy, like the creek water. She was small and stooped, wrapped in a thick, moth-eaten shawl, despite the mildness of the day. She moved with a slow, deliberate gait, leaning heavily on a gnarled wooden cane. "Blackwood, you say?" Her voice was a dry rustle, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "He ain't been by, not for a long spell." "Oh," Arthur said, disappointed. Well, do you mind if I use your phone? It's rather urgent." The old woman stared at him, her gaze unnervingly blank. "Phone's been dead for years, boy, just like most everything else in Hollow Creek." "Dead?" Arthur looked at the rotary phone. It certainly looked ancient enough. "But how do you communicate? What if there's an emergency?" A slow, unsettling smile stretched the woman's thin lips, revealing surprisingly white, though uneven, teeth. "We don't get many emergencies here, Mr. Penhaligon, Arthur Penhaligon. My great-aunt Elara Penhaligon, she owned the manor." The old woman's smile vanished. Her cloudy eyes seemed to sharpen, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Ah, Elara's kin. So you're the new master of the manor, then?" It wasn't a question. "Well, I suppose so, temporarily. I plan to sell it." "Sell it?" She chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Folks round here don't sell. Folks round here stay." A chill ran down Arthur's spine. "Are there many other residents?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "The village seems very quiet." "Quiet it is," she said, her gaze drifting towards the grimy window, towards the silent houses outside. "We're a quiet folk, keep to ourselves, always have." She paused, then added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "It's safer that way. The creek, it don't like outsiders much. And it don't like being disturbed." "The creek?" Arthur remembered the note in the manor. "The well water is unpredictable." "And the painting by Silas Thorne. They call from the water. Old Man Creek, we call it," the woman said, her eyes still fixed on the world outside. "Been here longer than any of us. Longer than the trees, some say. It has its ways, its needs." Arthur felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a sleepy, isolated village. There was something deeply wrong here, something festering beneath the surface of silence and decay. Needs? What kind of needs? The old woman turned back to him, her pale eyes boring into his. "It needs to be respected, Mr. Penhaligon. It needs offerings to keep the balance." Elara, she understood that. She knew the old ways. "Offerings?" Arthur's blood ran cold. "What kind of offerings?" The old woman's smile returned, wider this time, and infinitely more disturbing. "Oh, the creek ain't particular, so long as it's fresh." Before Arthur could press further, the bell above the door tinkled again. A man entered, tall and gaunt, with eyes as dark and deep as well shafts. He wore rough, homespun clothes and carried an unnervingly sharp-looking sickle. He nodded curtly at the old woman, then fixed Arthur with an unblinking stare. "This him, Martha?" the man rumbled, his voice low and gravelly. "Aye, Jedediah," Martha replied. "This is Arthur Penhaligon." Elara's blood. Jedediah's gaze didn't waver. It was cold, appraising, like a butcher eyeing a prize steer. "Heard you was comin'. The manor's been waiting. The creek's been restless." Arthur felt trapped. The atmosphere in the small store had become suffocating. "Look," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I appreciate the local color, but I really just need to find a way to contact Mr. Blackwood and arrange for my departure." "Departure?" Jedediah echoed, a hint of something like amusement, or perhaps menace, in his tone. "Ain't many folks depart from Hollow Creek, Mr. Penhaligon. Not once they've settled in." He took a step closer, the sickle glinting faintly in the dim light. "Elara, she knew her place. She knew her duties. We expect you'll learn yours too." Chapter 4, The Artist's Warning. Arthur backed away, his hand instinctively reaching for the door. "I think I should be going," he said, his voice tight. Neither Martha nor Jedediah made any move to stop him. They just watched, their expressions unreadable, as he fumbled with the doorknob and practically fled the store. Outside, the silence of Hollow Creek felt even more menacing. He glanced back at the store. Martha and Jedediah were standing in the doorway, two dark silhouettes watching him. He hurried away, his footsteps echoing unnaturally on the packed earth path. He needed to get back to the manor, gather his few belongings, and get in that truck. Even if it meant driving on a near-empty tank, even if it meant getting lost in Blackwood Forest, anything was better than staying in this place. The conversation in the store had solidified his fear into a cold certainty. Hollow Creek was not just strange, it was dangerous. As he passed a particularly dilapidated cottage, its roof caved in on one side, he noticed something he hadn't before. Tucked away in the overgrown yard, almost hidden by a tangle of thorny bushes, was a small, weathered shed. Unlike the house, the shed door was ajar. Curiosity, or perhaps a desperate hope for some clue, some explanation, warred with his instinct to flee. He hesitated, then cautiously approached the shed. Peeking inside, he saw that it was an artist's studio. Canvases were stacked against the walls, brushes lay scattered on a paint-splattered table, and the air was thick with the smell of turpentine and oil paints. A welcome change from the pervasive scent of decay. This must have been Silas Thorne's studio, the reclusive painter who had vanished. He stepped inside. Most of the canvases were landscapes of Blackwood Forest, dark and brooding, but skillfully executed. Then he saw them, a series of smaller, more disturbing paintings, hidden behind a larger canvas. These were not landscapes. They were nightmarish visions. Twisted, shadowy figures with glowing eyes emerging from dark water. A monstrous form, vaguely humanoid but with elongated limbs and a featureless face, lurking among the trees. And one, the most unsettling of all, depicted Penhaligon Manor itself, but with a malevolent red light glowing from its windows and small dark shapes flitting around its gables like bats. Beneath this painting, scrawled directly onto the canvas, in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "It feeds on sorrow. It demands the tithe. Do not listen to the whispers. Do not look into the water." Arthur stared, his blood turning to ice. This was Thorne's warning. The painter hadn't just wandered off. He had seen something, understood something about the true nature of Hollow Creek and the manor, and he had tried to leave a message. He rummaged through a pile of discarded sketches and found a small leather-bound journal. It was Thorne's. He flipped it open, his hands trembling. The entries started out normal enough, observations about the light, the changing seasons, sketches of the forest. But as the dates progressed, the tone grew more frantic, the handwriting more erratic. October 12th. The locals are peculiar, watchful. They speak of the Old Man Creek with a reverence that borders on fear. Martha, the old woman at the store, gave me a strange look when I said I was staying at the manor. Said Elara Penhaligon was one of them. October 19th. Can't sleep. The house, it whispers at night. And the creek. I hear things, splashing, a kind of humming. It's getting into my dreams. November the 2nd. Saw something in the water today. Just a glimpse, pale, long, gone before I could be sure. The villagers leave, offerings, small carved wooden figures, sometimes animals. Found a dead fox by the creek this morning. Its eyes were missing. November 15th. They want me to participate. Jedediah came by, said the creek was hungry, said Elara always provided. He looked at my paintings, the new ones. He didn't like them. Said I was seeing things I shouldn't. The final entry was short, almost illegible. December 3rd, it knows my name. It's in the house, in the walls, the water. It calls to me, must get out, must warn, it wants more. The entry ended there, a jagged smear of ink trailing off the page. Arthur slammed the journal shut, his heart pounding. Thorne hadn't just vanished. He had been consumed by whatever malevolent force resided in Hollow Creek. And now, it seemed, it was Arthur's turn. He had to leave. Now. He burst out of the shed, the journal clutched in his hand, and ran towards Penhaligon Manor. He didn't care about his belongings anymore. He just needed the truck keys. As he rounded a bend in the path, he skidded to a halt. Jedediah stood there, blocking his way. The sickle held loosely in his hand. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood half a dozen other villagers, men and women, their faces grim, their eyes cold and watchful. They formed a silent, menacing barricade. "Going somewhere, Mr. Penhaligon?" Jedediah asked, his voice devoid of warmth. "I'm leaving," Arthur said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "This place, it's not for me." "Oh, but it is," Jedediah said, taking a slow step forward. The others fanned out, subtly cutting off any escape. Penhaligon Manor needs a Penhaligon. The creek needs its due. Elara understood. You will too, in time. I don't want to understand, Arthur said, backing away. Let me pass. That won't be happening, Jedediah said. His eyes flicked to the journal in Arthur's hand. Poking your nose where it don't belong, I see. Thorn was a fool. He saw too much, listened too little. He tried to warn people, Arthur exclaimed, about this place, about what you're doing. A cold smile touched Jedediah's lips. We're survivors, Mr. Penhaligon. We do what needs to be done to appease the old man, to keep Hollow Creek alive. It's a small price to pay. A small price? Arthur felt a surge of anger, momentarily eclipsing his fear. What about Thorn? What happened to him? He paid his tithe, Jedediah said simply. Just as Elara paid hers for many years, just as you will pay yours. The villagers began to close in, their movements slow, deliberate, like predators cornering their prey. Arthur looked around wildly. There was no escape. Chapter 5. The seller's secret desperation fueled Arthur. He wasn't going to end up like Silas Thorn, another forgotten offering to some ancient, malevolent entity. He feigned a move to his left, then darted right, trying to break through a gap in their closing circle. A rough hand grabbed his arm, yanking him back. He stumbled, dropping Thorn's journal. Jedediah was on him in an instant, his grip like iron. The cold, sharp edge of the sickle pressed against Arthur's throat. Don't be foolish, Mr. Penhaligon, Jedediah hissed, his breath smelling of damp earth and something rotten. There's no leaving Hollow Creek, not for you. They frog-marched him back towards Penhaligon Manor, a silent, grim procession. The other villagers followed, their expressions unreadable, their silence more terrifying than any threat. Arthur's mind raced. He had to find a way out, a weapon, anything. Inside the manor, the air felt even colder, more oppressive. The whispers seemed to swirl around him, louder now, almost gleeful. They dragged him through the dusty hallways towards the back of the house, towards the kitchen, towards the cellar door. The ornate iron key was still on the mantelpiece. Jedediah snatched it. Elara kept the cellar locked for a reason, he said, a strange light in his eyes. It's where the old man is closest, where the veil is thinnest. Arthur struggled, but their grip was too strong. Two of the men held his arms, their fingers digging into his flesh. Jedediah inserted the key into the heavy wooden cellar door. The lock turned with a rusty shriek that seemed to echo the house's pain. The door creaked open, revealing a flight of steep, narrow stone steps leading down into impenetrable darkness. A gust of frigid air rushed up, carrying with it an overpowering stench of stagnant water, mildew, and something else. Something indescribably foul, like decaying flesh. The whispers intensified, coiling around Arthur's mind, trying to pry their way in. He felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying vertigo. No, he cried, planting his feet. I won't go down there. Jedediah chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. You don't have a choice, Penhaligon. The creek calls. And it's time for your initiation. They dragged him, struggling and shouting, towards the gaping maw of the cellar. He kicked out, catching one of his captors in the shin. The man grunted in pain, but didn't release his grip. Arthur felt a sharp blow to the back of his head. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and the world tilted, darkness encroaching at the edges of his vision. He was vaguely aware of being dragged down the stone steps, his body bumping against the rough walls. The cold was intense, seeping into his bones. The stench was overwhelming. The whispers were a cacophony now, a chorus of voices, ancient and evil, promising oblivion. He was thrown onto a damp earthen floor. The cellar door slammed shut above him, the heavy thud of a bolt sliding into place, sealing his fate. He was plunged into absolute darkness. For a long moment, he lay there, stunned, his head throbbing. The cold was numbing, the silence profound, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere nearby and his own ragged breathing. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up. His pockets. Matches. He still had the box of matches from the hall table. With fumbling, shaking fingers, he managed to strike one. The tiny flame sputtered, casting a feeble, flickering light. He was in a vast, stone-lined cellar. The air was thick with moisture, the walls slick with slime. Barrels, old and rotting, lined one wall. Chains, rusted and heavy, hung from the ceiling. And in the center of the cellar, there was a well. It wasn't a normal well. It was more like a dark, gaping pit, its sides rough-hewn stone, descending into an abyss from which no light escaped. The stench was strongest here, emanating from the black depths of the pit. And the whispers? They seemed to be coming from the well itself, a siren song of madness and despair. He remembered Thorne's warning, "Do not look into the water." Another match flared, then died. He lit another. He had to find a way out. There had to be another exit, a coal chute, anything. He began to explore the perimeter of the cellar, his small flame dancing precariously. The walls were solid stone, unbroken. He found a pile of what looked like old bones in one corner, small and animal-like. Or perhaps, not all animal. He recoiled in horror. Then he saw it. Scratched into the stone wall near the well were symbols. The same strange, disturbing symbols he had seen in the book in Ilara's library. And beneath them, more scratchings, words, messages left by previous occupants. It sees in the dark. The water changes you. Don't let it take your name. Ilara tried to stop it. Ilara, his great aunt, she hadn't been one of them, not entirely. She had tried to stop it. What had happened to her? Had she become another offering? A new sound reached him, cutting through the dripping water and the whispers, a soft, wet, dragging sound coming from the direction of the well. His match went out. He fumbled for another, his fingers slick with sweat. The dragging sound grew closer. He could hear something breathing, a rasping, liquid sound. He struck another match. The flame illuminated a shape emerging from the darkness near the well. It was pale, bloated, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its face, he couldn't see its face, it was shrouded in shadow, but he could feel its gaze, cold and hungry. This was what the villagers worshipped. This was the old man of the creek. Arthur screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was swallowed by the oppressive darkness of the cellar. He scrambled backwards, tripping over something on the floor. He fell heavily, the matches scattering from his grasp. He was plunged back into darkness, the creature's wet, rasping breath drawing nearer. Chapter 6. The Price of Silence. Panic, stark and absolute, clawed at Arthur. He crab-walked backward on the damp earth, his hands searching desperately for a weapon, a rock, anything. The dragging, gurgling sounds were almost upon him. He could smell it now. The stench of the grave, of stagnant water, of something ancient and utterly corrupt. His hand closed around something solid and wooden, a piece of a broken crate, perhaps. He swung it wildly in the darkness, connecting with something soft and yielding. A wet, gurgling shriek echoed in the cellar, followed by a furious hissing. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline coursing through him. He had to get to the door, even if it was bolted. He had to try. He stumbled through the darkness, guided by the memory of the cellar's layout. He could hear the creature moving behind him, faster now, its earlier sluggishness replaced by an enraged agility. Something cold and slimy brushed against his ankle. He kicked out, a choked cry escaping his lips. He reached the stone steps, his hands finding the rough, cold wall. He scrambled upwards, towards where he knew the door was. He could hear the creature clawing its way up the steps behind him, its rasping breaths echoing in the narrow stairwell. He reached the door, his hands fumbling for a latch, a handle, anything. It was solid, unyielding. He pounded on it, shouting for help, knowing it was futile. The villagers wouldn't help him. They had put him here. A cold, wet hand clamped onto his shoulder, its grip surprisingly strong. Long, sharp fingernails, or perhaps claws, dug into his flesh. He cried out in pain and terror, twisting, trying to break free. The creature's presence was overwhelming, its stench suffocating. He could feel its cold, damp breath on the back of his neck. The whispers were deafening now, inside his head, trying to tear his sanity apart. Join us, become one. The water waits. Forever. He thrashed wildly, his elbow connecting with something hard. The grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was enough. He tore himself free, spinning around to face his pursuer on the narrow steps. In the faint, almost imperceptible light filtering from some unseen crack, he caught a glimpse of its face. It was pale, bloated, featureless, except for two dark, empty sockets where eyes should have been, and a gaping, toothless maw that seemed to stretch too wide. It was a thing of nightmares, a perversion of life. He swung the piece of wood again with all his remaining strength. It connected with the creature's head with a sickening, wet thud. The thing shrieked, a sound that was both human and utterly alien, and recoiled, stumbling back down the steps. Arthur didn't wait. He turned and threw himself at the door again, shoulder-barging it with all his might. The old wood groaned, splintered, but held. He hit it again and again, fueled by a desperate, primal fear. On the third impact, there was a crack. A sliver of grey light appeared. The bolt on the other side was old, rusted. He hit it one more time, and the wood around the bolt splintered, the door bursting open with a screech of tortured metal. He stumbled out of the cellar into the relative brightness of the kitchen, gasping for breath, his body trembling, his clothes soaked with slime and something else he didn't want to identify. He didn't pause. He ran. Through the silent, watching manor, out the front door, into the oppressive grey daylight of Hollow Creek. He expected the villagers to be waiting for him, but the hamlet was deserted, silent, as if nothing had happened. He sprinted towards where he had left the truck, his lungs burning, his mind reeling. He fumbled for the keys in his pocket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp them. He threw himself into the driver's seat, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died. "No," he cried, pounding the steering wheel. "Not now!" He tried again. Another cough, another sputter. He could hear sounds from the manor. A low, guttural roar of rage, the sound of something heavy being thrown. The creature from the cellar. It was coming. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried the ignition one last time. The engine caught, roared to life, a beautiful, deafening sound in the terrifying silence of Hollow Creek. He slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The tires spun on the muddy track, then gripped. The truck lurched forward, away from Penhaligon Manor, away from the horrors it contained. He didn't look back. He drove like a man possessed, bouncing over the rutted track, scraping past grasping branches, his eyes fixed on the narrow road ahead. He didn't slow down until Blackwood Forest began to recede in his rearview mirror, replaced by the more familiar, comforting sight of open countryside. Only then did he allow himself to pull over, his body shaking uncontrollably, sobs racking his frame. He had escaped. Somehow he had escaped. Chapter 7. The Lingering Shadow. Arthur never reported what happened in Hollow Creek. Who would believe him? A story of a sentient, malevolent creek, a creature in a cellar, and villagers who made human sacrifices. They would lock him up. He drove straight back to his quiet suburban town, to his quiet, unremarkable life. He sold the truck, burned the clothes he had worn, and tried to scrub the stench of Hollow Creek from his skin, from his memory. He never contacted Mr. Blackwood again. He didn't care about Penhaligon Manor or his inheritance. Let it rot. Let the forest reclaim it. But Hollow Creek didn't easily relinquish its grip. He had nightmares, vivid and terrifying, filled with dark water, grasping hands and featureless faces. He would wake up screaming, the whispers from the cellar echoing in his ears. During the day, he was jumpy, paranoid. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of his apartment building sounded like footsteps in the manor. He found Silas Thorne's journal, which he had unknowingly stuffed into his pocket during his flight from the artist's shed. He read it again and again, searching for answers, for solace, but finding only confirmation of the horrors he had witnessed. It feeds on sorrow, it demands the tithe. He became obsessed with water. He couldn't stand the sound of dripping taps. He avoided looking at his own reflection in puddles or dark liquids. The image of the well in the cellar, that black, gaping maw, was seared into his mind. He tried to lose himself in his work at the library, but the familiar comfort of books had Su Tagsha. The ancient texts, the folklore, the stories of old gods and forgotten rituals, they all seemed to point back to Hollow Creek, to the darkness he had glimpsed. One evening, a month after his escape, he was shelving books in the occult section when he came across a slim, leather-bound volume he didn't recognize. It had no title on its spine, no library markings. Curious, he opened it. The The pages were filled with the same strange symbols he had seen in Ilara's library and scratched on the cellar walls of Penhaligon Manor. And there were drawings, crude, disturbing sketches of the creature from the well, of villagers with blank eyes making offerings, of a dark, swirling vortex of water. A note fell out from between the pages. It was penned in a familiar, elegant, spidery script. Ilara Penhaligon's handwriting. Arthur, if you are reading this, then you have seen the truth of Hollow Creek. I am sorry. I tried to protect it, to contain it, as my ancestors did before me. The tithe. It was meant to be symbolic, small offerings to appease the old man, to keep him dormant, but some grew greedy. Some wanted more power. They twisted the old ways, their offerings becoming darker, more substantial. The creature in the cellar is a manifestation, a focal point of the creek's hunger. It is tied to the bloodline, to the manor. As long as a Penhaligon resides there, it has a conduit. I tried to sever that connection, to starve it, but I failed. They turned on me. The book you hold contains some of the old knowledge, the rituals of binding, of warding. But be warned, to fight such ancient darkness is to invite it into yourself. Some doors are best left unopened. The creek remembers, Arthur. It will always remember, and it will always hunger. You carry its shadow with you now. I am truly sorry. E.P. Arthur stared at the note, his blood cold. His great aunt hadn't been a monster. She had been a guardian, a failed one perhaps. But she had tried. And now that burden, that shadow, had passed to him. He looked at the book in his hands, the rituals of binding, of warding. Could he fight it? Could he end it? Or would he, like Ilara, like Thorn, be consumed? That night, as he lay in bed, the whispers returned, fainter than before, but undeniably there. They seemed to be coming from the pipes in his apartment, from the glass of water on his nightstand. We know where you are, Arthur. The water connects all. We are patient. We will wait. He knew then that his escape from Hollow Creek was not an ending, but a beginning. The horror wasn't confined to that forgotten hamlet, to that decaying manor. He had brought a piece of it back with him. The fight for his sanity, for his soul, had just begun. And the whispers of Hollow Creek, he feared, would follow him for the rest of his days. A constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the world, waiting patiently for its tithe. He was no longer just Arthur Penhaligon, the quiet librarian. He was a man who had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. And it remembered his name,